Good morning. French authorities confirmed 3 deaths yesterday morning following an incident off the coast at Sangate near Calais, in which 45 people were rescued after struggling to board a small boat bound for the UK.
Yeah, Border Security and Asylum Minister Dame Angela Eagles said that ruthless criminals were responsible for overloading the boats.
But who is really to blame?
Well, we're joined by Deputy Editor of Spiked, Fraser Myers. Are the smuggling gangs to blame, or should they have been stopped by now, Fraser? What do you reckon?
Well, it's the Starmer's policy is to smash the gangs, but it looks like the gangs are smashing Starmer, unfortunately. I think the issue here is that we all want to see enforcement of the law. We all want to see these criminal gangs brought to boot, but there doesn't seem to be any other policy on the other end that is essentially reducing the incentive to come over. I think, unfortunately, tragedies like this happen because people know that if they come to Britain, there is next to zero chance of them being deported. Even if they have an asylum claim denied, they will probably just be absorbed into the black economy. Even if they commit sometimes horrendous crimes, they might not be deported, whether on human rights grounds, under our own laws, or due to the ECHR. So the incentives there are so strong for people to come over illegally. There is essentially there's nothing saying you can't come. And that's something that Keir Starmer and the Labour Party are not really interested in dealing with, because they see, and it's true, many people are genuine asylum seekers and refugees, but 100% of them are not. And essentially they treat everyone as that. And they see this dichotomy between, well, it's just the evil smuggling gangs, exploiting people, exploiting helpless people. That may be true in a lot of circumstances, but it's not true in all circumstances. And until that distinction is made more clear.
Do you know, I'm absolutely sick of this. I don't know why they haven't got a handle on it. It seems pretty obvious to me. Those boats would be, if I were in charge, those boats would be stopped. If it would require me to get out the ECHR, then I would do that if it meant that would happen, because people are dying. So what is the solution? Would Rwanda have worked? And should we be leaving the ECHR to make this?
I think we will have to leave. I think we do have to leave the ECHR. I think we've got to the situation where, there's been some incredibly bizarre cases this year where even people who, any sane person would say they should be deported. So recently there was a Congolese man who sexually assaulted his own stepdaughter, but was allowed to stay in the UK on the grounds of his right to a family life. Now, this is the same family that he is, terrorising, and he has to stay in the UK on those grounds. So, being in the ECHR, the years of case law creates all these kinds of absurdities that we can't seem to wriggle out of. So that's a big factor. Rwanda, I'm not so sure about, but we just need to enforce the law as it is. Essentially, if you come here, you will easily be able to slip away. There are so many cases where people have been told you're not allowed to stay, but they're not actually deported. So there's nothing to disincentivize people from coming.
Fraser, you must be pretty pessimistic then, because the odds of us leaving the ECHR are next to zero under this government, or indeed even with the Conservatives under Kemi Badenoch. So, in your view, we're doomed, aren't we?
A little bit. It's also possible to ignore the ECHR, which is what France does quite a lot. They will make their own risk assessment and decide that someone is too dangerous and then deport them anyway, which seems sensible. That's not going to happen under Keir Starmer, because he seems to have, one of the few consistent principles, if you can call it that he holds, is that he believes in international law, international courts, human rights law above everything else. Maybe that might be different under, a Conservative administration, or, perhaps a different flavour of government that we might not expect. But yes, I think under Labour, I don't have any hope of things changing.
At what point will somebody take this seriously? Because I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, this has to stop. Even the French must be looking at it and thinking, because there was a moment when we left the EU, that there was, let them come across. That attitude was definitely there. Now it's really affecting the French, because people are coming to France specifically to now cross the Channel. Why don't they do something serious about it at their end?
Well, I think it's hard to say how much or little they're doing, but I think but you're right. We do have to take this seriously. We can't just. It's really actually quite scary how every other week it seems like a group of people die. It sort of falls out of the news cycle. These are 3 human beings that perished in the Channel. There are people been crossing on Christmas Day. This really is something that governments do have to get a grip with. But I feel like the political class doesn't really care about enforcing our borders. In fact, they probably think it's dirty to enforce Britain's borders. The outgoing head of the border force a few years ago says, "I bloody hate borders." So when you have that in the British political class, I think in the European political class as well, it's going to be very difficult to get a grip on this problem. It's not at the top of their inbox.
Labour would say, the government will say, that they do take it very seriously. Admittedly, it wasn't one of their milestones or missions, whatever it was, in his reset speech, Prime Minister's reset speech a couple of months ago. But they do say that smashing the gangs, controlling migration is very important. And they're essentially blaming the previous government for not taking it seriously enough. So at least in rhetoric, you'd have to say that they are taking it seriously.
I think certainly yes, and Keir Starmer has come out with, in terms of rhetoric, and Keir Starmer also gave that speech talking about the explosion in legal migration as well. But is that really part of Labour's underlying philosophy? I think many people, certainly party members, a lot of the MPs, actually think that this is really about, the answer to this is to have more safe routes, things like that. That's not necessarily a bad thing. People can be generous to genuine asylum seekers. We have been in this country. Think about all the hundreds of thousands of people who've come from Hong Kong, escaping oppression from the CCP or from Ukraine during the war. People understand that it's the right thing to do to give asylum to people in those circumstances. But I think Labour seems to see everyone automatically as deserving of a right to come here. And I think that's sort of baked into how they see the world, even if Keir Starmer gives a speech decrying the Tories being an open borders party.
So what do you think it should be the first thing that a Labour government could do? Because smashing the gangs, the rhetoric, as Adam says, they've had a lot of rhetoric. They've all been talking, they're all talking a load of nonsense. Nobody's actually done anything. I actually miss Rishi Sunak now. Does anybody miss Rishi Sunak?
Yeah.
But, the question is, what should be the first move for this government to try and fix the situation, in your view?
I think you have to send a message to people who are coming over illegally, especially if they don't have a right to, they don't have two legs to stand on in terms of their right to asylum, that, they will be sent home. And that currently isn't the case. I mean, there's barely, I suppose this is a problem more broadly. There's no enforcement of most laws at the moment in the UK, let alone immigration law. I think that has to be the message. People need to know. I suppose that was the point of...
Well, there's an enforcement of
there is
That's the only one that...
exactly. Unfortunately, yes. So that would mean, looking at, not necessarily repealing the entire Human Rights Act, but looking at what aspects of this are getting in the way of a sensible migration policy. What can we do about the ECHR? Which rulings can we ignore, even before we get into the tricky thing of actually leaving it?
The ECHR question looms over Westminster, doesn't it? How do you see this playing out in SW1? So you've got half the Tories saying we should leave the ECHR, the other half of which Kevin Badenoch leads, really saying no, we shouldn't. Then you've got Reform snapping at the heels. Is this just going to create more chaos over the next 4 years, 4.5 years?
I think, there is always the potential for even though there's only 120 Tories, they could still split and still argue over this. I think Kemi Badenoch is more open to it, but I think she just doesn't want to be committed on any position at the moment. I think they have about one policy at the moment, which is like backing the farmers. But I don't think it will be possible. I think if the Conservatives don't back leaving the ECHR, then they've left such a big flank open for Reform to take over, to take that position. I think it is untenable, actually, for the Conservative Party to say that this doesn't matter, that the ECHR is irrelevant. I think that will be exposed in the debate. I think they will either have to come towards that position, perhaps offer a referendum or something like that. Heaven forbid. That would be great fun. And obviously people will vote to leave because the arguments are fairly simple. But I think they'll have to come to that position. Labour, of course, will back the ECHR, and I think it will. If we have that national debate, I think that will really hurt them, because the position is untenable now. ECHR, good idea, after the Second World War, but the case law has changed things so much that it has essentially created its own web of laws that have become impossible for a country like us, a country that takes these obligations seriously, to get out of.
OK, so what about in the interim, whilst we're trying to work out what to do with that? Is there any way of stopping people who come here, if they fail their asylum, to stop having us fund all the litigious process? So more and more appeals, more lawyers. I mean, we're paying for that.
Yeah.
There must be a way to say, well, you failed once, you've had one chance. If you want to do it again, you need to pay for it yourself.
Well, there should be, and there should be. I think if you fail, you should be sent home.
Well,
but
exactly,
at the moment, that just isn't the case.
But they can appeal.
They can appeal.
So why can we not stop that?
Could people be able to appeal from overseas? Should people be able to possibly apply for asylum overseas and then not be taken seriously if they come over on a boat?
Can we stop that?
I think at the moment we can't because of the legal implications, and then people can sue. They can
Well, but
not only
with their own money. If you want to sue someone, use your own money. That's fine. Do what you like. But I think you've been given one appeal. You've failed. Either leave or you pay for yourself to, if you want to try and appeal that decision. But why can't that happen? Surely that's not a breach of human rights.
I think that's far too sensible to be considered by the political class.